UX Blog podcast, bringing you up to date with the current trends, hot topics, and career advice in the field of user experience. I'm Nicholas Tenhue, and you can visit us at theuxblog.com. Welcome to another episode of the UX Blog podcast. Today we have Andrea Picchi joining us, who is a designer, a mentor, and evangelist at Sony Mobile. So welcome to the show, Andrea.
Welcome, Nicholas. Thank you for having me.
Great. So why don't you tell us a little bit about what you've worked on in the past and what you're doing right now?
Yeah, now I'm working for Sony Mobile. In the past, as you just said, had the chance to work for quite a good company in terms of design. Just after my PhD, I just in US had a brief stint with Google and Apple, and also eBay. And then I moved back to Europe. And in Europe, I worked with Samsung Mobile and Nokia. When Nokia was just right before the acquisition from Microsoft, and we were working on the Lumia, was called Lumia Watch, was a prototype for the first smartwatch, was back in 2010, 2011. So there was no smartwatch whatsoever on the market. And then was acquired, Nokia has been acquired by Microsoft. They changed the name of the project in Murak. You can make a search online. You will find a lot of images and renders from the project. And then I moved to Samsung at the time of Galaxy S5, when the first SL has been integrated into the system. And then I moved to UK and I worked for Virgin Media, other company like a small company, startup also called Babylon Health in conjunction with the Google DeepMind in the healthcare space. And then I moved to Sweden, working for Sony Mobile. We work on the new Sony Xperia smartphone. That's in a nutshell.
That's the short version. So what did you focus on in your PhD?
So it's a human-computer interaction, because in Italy, I studied cognitive psychology, and then I studied computer science. Well, my first year in the university was 1994. So it was right at the beginning of the internet. For a young guy in Italian, there was no way to understand the global market in terms of university offering. So I wasn't able to say, wow, there is something called the human-computer interaction. I didn't know. So I just started studying psychology. And then since I really love technology and I was born with the Commodore 64, I say, you know what, let's take that leap of faith and start again studying computer science. With that PhD, I just put everything together. So apply cognition to design and to technology. So it's what happening now, but it's just more than 20 years after. So it's now it's almost a given. But back then was right at the beginning of, at least for me, from Europe.
Right. So it must have been one of the kind of early adopters, one of the first courses in HCI back then, but now they're kind of everywhere. Great to see that growth over time, though. So you've obviously had a really interesting journey through software and technology. So today's episode is all about creating a design-driven organization. In terms of what a company can do in order to become design-driven, what does a company really need?
That's a great question. Simple and straightforward to just approach the problem is to think about the steps. They're not steps, they're more mindset of the design thinking process. As per definition of the D school, for example, you have the empathize steps, and then you have the one when you diverge, and then when you with many ideas, and then when you want to converge, and then when you want to prototype, and then evaluate and test. A good way is to just create the right environment for each step. And if you think about it, for example, humanizing, you need a way to connect with your customer base, with your user at any level of the process. When you want to diverge, you need a space for your team that engender creativity and give the opportunity to visualize the design and to engender the communication that is so important when you design something. And when you want to converge, you need to bring everyone on board. So you need a process, you need ceremonies, you need a moment when everyone start to talk about it and express their ideas and criticize it in a good way, the design that you just created. And then if you move on and you see the prototype instead, it means that you need, it may be a lab, it may be a time slot in your process that you can use to give form and shape to your hypothesis, to your just design ideas. And of course, evaluating it when you test it. So in a nutshell, from practical point of view, you need many, many small things to just put in place that mindset. Then from organizational point of view, it's a little bit more complex because you need initiative from the bottom and initiative from the top. Because from the bottom, because you design is everyone's responsibility. That's the hard things to understand for many people. Imagine a project manager that just say, "Wow, that's design is your responsibility." Project managers say, "What? That doesn't really make any sense to me." So I'm
Or
just
even
delivering.
what does design mean to that person, you know?
Yeah, exactly. So it's you have the practical one, and then maybe we can go a little bit deeper. But as a beginning, we can say that you need many, many initiative to just spread design culture at the bottom, and then you need a strong leadership at the top that has the mandate to make the changes that you need to just support the initiative from the bottom. Otherwise, you don't really go anywhere because the lead doesn't have any power really
Right.
in terms of organization and operational. But even the head of it's reporting, for example, to I don't know, director of product. Director of product, if you are not like in Apple when the design, the UX is really embedded at any level, he has completely different priorities. So he never put UX and design at the first level. So you need someone like a chief design officer or chief design, maybe a senior vice president level that eventually report direct to the CEO. In that case, you have your back covered to just put in place all the initiative that you need to spread the design thinking in the company.
Right. We had Laura Klein on the show a couple of weeks ago. You repeated kind of what she said about like in order to be successful at UX in a company, really you need top down kind of buy-in and you need to actually sell that design thinking vision from the top down in order to be successful. In addition to all of these grassroots movements of kind of education and buy-in from the actual teams that are going to be actually doing the design thinking. But I guess in terms of other blockers that companies face, the Stanford Design School over there kind of talks about conceptual blocks, about semantic gaps and social barriers. Maybe I can kind of go through what I mean by each of those before we talk about them. So when I mean conceptual blocks, I talk about when teams gravitate towards kind of groupthink in an organization. So inability to think outside the box or outside the culture. So by kind of empowering people to do design thinking and letting them hear the voice of the user, they can expand their conceptual horizons and kind of understand a lot more about the world and about the problems that they're trying to solve. And then I guess semantic gaps is about the way that we talk about things. We talk about different words to mean the same thing or the same words to mean different things, right? So even like the term prototype for a technical team might be something to do with a model that proves that your algorithm works, or for a business team, it might be a mathematical thing that you're modeling. But for us in the design world, you know, it's a throwaway prototype that you use to test a hypothesis and prove or disprove it. Design thinking and being design driven, it doesn't happen naturally because the knowledge doesn't diffuse naturally from an organizational point of view. You have these small silos of teams, either engineers or product people or whoever it may be. And UX teams don't necessarily sit down and eat lunch with those people because engineers eat lunch with engineers and product people eat lunch with product people. So it's about educating people and getting them to co-locate and move over to different places and talk to each other to remove those blocks. So in your experience, how have you got over those things in a practical
Yeah.
sense?
From which one you want to start? Just name one. We'll start from there.
Sure. Let's go from conceptual blocks. So even getting an understanding of what being design driven is and thinking outside the culture.
Yeah. So understanding. The understanding is, for example, if you look at a company like Apple or Google, when you join the company, you have to go through a design thinking onboarding or initiation, whatever you want to call it. So you have to be prepared to embrace that type of mindset. So for the new hires, you can put those people through that type of onboarding. And so with the employee that you already have, you have really, as you said, to just put everyone on the same page. So in terms of dictionary, vocabulary, and the word that the people they use, there is no other way than just put some initiative in place like courses or introduction to the employees. But again, it's a two-way thing. If someone doesn't believe in that or thinks that is not a good thing, at that point it's quite hard, because the only choice that you have is to just let the employee find a better place for him. Otherwise, it's like a good relationship with a romantic relationship, right? It's two ways. You can't do everything alone. If nothing comes from the other part, it doesn't really work.
Right. No matter how one side works, it's never going to work if the other side's not reciprocating.
Exactly, because at the end of the day, the organization, a company is just a bunch of people that they comes together to get something done. So it's like a family. It's just a group of people, and the very same rules are applying here, like a romantic, a family, a small group. So you have to spread the knowledge. You have to just inject the culture and inside every person.
Right. So if somebody in a team is kind of used to doing something a certain way and they haven't been exposed
Yeah,
to, user-centered methods and things like this,
yeah.
it's hard for them to even conceptualize and, why would I do that? I don't even
Yeah.
understand because I've never done it before.
Yeah, and that's when those initiatives, they can make the difference, because if the people, they don't know what we are talking about, they have to go through some initiation. But the big misunderstanding here is that I'm not creative, I'm not a designer, right? And that's
Right,
when
right.
the word design thinking, it's a lovely word, but sometimes it's has a problem in itself, because the people say I'm not a designer, so I'm not thinking like a designer. Well, the people, they don't understand it, and it's so new to let them understand that basically it's just about problem solving, and is the way you just approach a problem and you come up with solution. And then if they apply that process, they can get a lot of benefits in their day-to-day life. It doesn't matter if it's marketing, if it's financial, and this is up to you to just let them understanding, and of course on them to just be open to new way. Because, and maybe we can open a parenthesis here, it will be probably beneficial to just put some definition. If we talk about design thinking, at least three way of thinking. We have the design thinking, at least in the IT space, the engineering thinking, and the business thinking. And that's how I usually explain this concept to the guys that don't know anything about design thinking. So you have, on one side, you have the engineering thinking, and the engineering thinking, what it does, we say that solves its way through. What I mean by that is that you have to isolate all the variables, and then you have to put all those variables inside an equation, and then you solve the equation. So it means that the engineering thinking is very powerful when you know the entire problem domain, when you are able to isolate every aspect of the problem. If you think about it, you design something when the developers, they don't know even in a small detail, they come back to the designer. Oh, what I should do when this happen? When I should do when the other things happen? It's because the engineering thinking needs every variable in the equation in order to solve that given equation. So you can understand that this is not always possible, especially when you want to innovate.
Especially when there's humans involved in the equation.
Yeah, yeah, you don't have always that clear picture. And that's why the engineering thinking is powerful, for example, into an agile environment, because the agile environment is based on requirements in opposition to the design environments that is based on hypothesis that is completely different. So when you have everything under control and you have a clear grasp of the problem, let's go with the engineering thinking, because it's just about optimized performance, the output, right? And then you have the business thinking. The business thinking, we used to say that optimize its way through. It means that it just isolate a set of different solutions, and then it just picks up one solution and then optimize that solution. Think about a campaign. You have to market a product. And then how can we market that product? Okay, we can market that way. We can market this way. We can market in another way. They pick one and then they optimize that way. And they maybe create a campaign on top of that concept. But again, to just apply that type of thinking, you need the solution in place. Again, when you want to innovate, when you want to solve or ask a very open question like how do we reinvent the healthcare, right? You don't have the all the detail about the problem because you don't really know. It's the first time. And then you don't even know, even less, the solution because you are at the beginning of the process. So you can understand that business people and marketing people, they struggle with the design and the ambiguity that comes from that type of problem solving. And the same story from the engineering. And that's why they start to push back, because they feel uncomfortable, because in their life, ambiguity, or even better, they put all their effort to kill ambiguity. That's what they do. So when you just come up with a good design challenge, they start to panic because they don't have the mindset and the mental model to approach that. But that's when design thinking comes into the picture, because design thinking basically prototypes its way through. So basically, it's the best way to deal with ambiguity, and the ambiguity then you get that comes into the picture when you want to solve very complex problem. For example, and I also work as a head of for Ryanair and the bigger airline in Europe, and we wanted to redesign the entire ecosystem and to redefine the travel experience. So the very first question was, how can we redefine the travel experience, right? In that case, the design lab wasn't able to apply the business thinking or the engineering thinking because we didn't know the answer. So we had to just come up with the hypothesis, test it, and then iterate and move on. And because the prototype and the design thinking is just another way to learn about the problem. It's not like in the engineering on the business that it's the outcome, it's the goal, it's the objective. In the design thinking, the prototype is just another way to ask question, and that's the big difference. But if you have that type of mindset, you can get a lot of benefits, even if you work in the financial, because you can explore uncharted territories and get with a very low amount of risk and get better results. So what we have done in the past, for example, we organize a design-a-thon, like a hackathon, right? So we invited people from non-design teams and we just asked them to bring a problem from their space. And then using a design thinking workshop structure, we help them to solve their problem using the design thinking. And at the end, they say, oh, that there is really some value to me here because I can really use it. That was, for example, a nice way to put in practice to let them touch the different approach. And that was something that works very well because especially those type of people, they need to touch in order to believe.
Right. It's like a wake up call to them that they suddenly realize that they have this whole new interesting tool in their tool belt and they can use it to solve a lot of different types of problems in their lives. Yeah,
Yeah,
whether it's at work or at home.
absolutely. Yeah,
And I guess that kind of leads to the second point that I talked about, which is the semantic gaps. So
yeah,
just by having somebody in a workshop and taking them through the whole design thinking process, instead of talking about the same concepts with different words or using different words to mean the same thing, we can actually share a language, which is the language of design thinking.
yeah,
Because a lot of the time when you say design thinking and prototyping and iterating, and people's eyes just glaze over.
yeah,
So by really
yeah,
evangelizing design thinking and other kind of design driven techniques, Google design sprints and doing co-design or something
yeah,
like that,
yeah.
by involving engineering, by involving product, we can start to talk a common language.
Yeah. It's nice that you touched the design sprint. The design sprint is a nice implementation of the design thinking. It just comes straight from Stanford and the Google Venture teams. So it's very nice. But first, let me say that this point it's less on designers because if you look back, let's say I don't know 5 years, 10 years, the designer they start to learn how to talk with engineering and developers. They start to understand what is agile. They start to understand what it means coding, what is a variable, what is a parameters, what is all the stuff, with the goal of have a good conversation with them, right? Now it's time that they will start to just understand how to communicate with the design. And that's the part when you need good people, when you need brilliant people that are open to that different type of mindset, because the only thing you can do, you can just create that connection, that open that communication, but then it's on them to embrace it. So that's when we are a little bit more limited because we need the other part. We can't do everything alone, as we just said.
Right. Takes two to tango.
Yeah, exactly. So, and the design sprint, like any other design thinking activity, requires a multidisciplinary team, and that's when we need that common dictionary, because this is a pre-requirement to just get the things done. Because otherwise, as you said, you have many people working together, sitting together, allocated together, and eventually even hitting together, but talking a completely different language. And since now we're talking about design, now is on them to just learn the right and embrace the new mindset. But a nice story is that, for example, as I said with Rainer, when we created the design lab, we also created a multidisciplinary team. And basically, we really pushed that type of concept of the multidisciplinary approach to problem solving, because I believe, and we believe, that different point of view is not just about developers talking in design terms, but is after that they have to bring that developer point of view on the table. We don't want to be a designer, and that's what sometimes another misunderstanding. They say, "Oh, if I start to apply design thinking, I will be a designer. I don't want to be a designer." No. We want your developer's point of view. We want to your I don't know, director of marketing point of view. We want to your HR vice president point of view, because that is what triggers better idea. And because another concept of the design thinking is to build idea on top of another idea. Is never coming up with something that is good or bad and that's it. Is you say something, another person say yes instead of no, yes. And what if we do this and that? And then you just climb another step. And then yes, what if we do this and that? But the more diverse ideas you have, the better, or maybe the more you can explore in the problem domain. From that point of view, the multidisciplinary team, when everyone is on the same page, as you just said, on the terminology side of things, that's the best.
Right.
And another things you can do, you can also back up this objective with a lot of design radiators. For example, what we have done with in the Rainer Design Lab, we picked a giant wall and we created the customer journey. So, and we just applied the service design thinking. So we just divided into, pre-service, core service, post-service. But the important thing was that wall was the aggregator. So we created a neutral zone where it wasn't a design zone, it wasn't a developer zone, it wasn't a marketing or business zone. It was just a natural where everyone just, was staring at that wall and just bouncing idea and just triggered that conversation. That things also helped the team to just overcome that mental barrier that you have while like a developers. I'm inside the design lab, or a businessman, I'm inside the design lab and don't feel comfortable. And by the way, doesn't really apply to everyone, because there is a lot of developers and business, they are so excited to just be part of the design process. But sometimes it happens, especially when you want to have that very wide impact and you start to touch people from not just design developers, but also from all their department in the company. Sometimes they can feel uncomfortable. So created that no-flight zone where everyone can go there and just have that conversation. And basically the journey for us was a shared object that didn't belong to anyone, but actually belongs to everyone. And that triggered that conversation and helped every people in the team to just overcome the different background and just comes together.
Right. And that kind of plays into the third point, which was about the social barriers. And by
Mm-hmm.
building a kind of shared workspace, you were able
Yeah.
to, break down those social barriers and share that organizational knowledge, share that kind of design thinking knowledge. And all the while, when you were exploring the problem space with other people, it's kind of keeping criticism until you reach the end of the solution space, and just kind of accepting new ideas and saying yes, yes instead of no. So that kind of
Yeah. Yeah.
that kind of leads pretty well from the semantic gaps, explaining what the whole process is and getting people involved, and then breaking social barriers by inviting them into a space that's almost a neutral zone. It's not
Yeah.
our design zone. It's not the around the desk of the programmer. It's just a neutral area. It's almost Switzerland, Switzerland of the
Yeah,
office.
exactly. Yeah. We can maybe say that it's important to remember that be creative is not something that you have embedded in your DNA. Of course, like everything else, there is some people they are more inclined to that type of activity from a brain point of view, but it's not really embedded in the DNA. So everyone can be creative, and because be creative, it means connecting the dots, and most of the time in a different way compared to what has been done, before. So it's not creating something crazy and just in a silos. You're thinking about something without anyone. Like, I don't know, you think about Einstein, you think about old man in a studio changing the world, just thinking about something. It doesn't happen that way, not even in the Einstein case. So, and that's why you need, as you say, that a space that even in the way you lay out the office or the studio has a lot of impact in the people's behavior. And but the people, they have to understand that be creative, it means connecting the dots, so the space have to reflect that concept. So that's why you need a many way to visualize idea, to visualize triggers, to visualize, for example, if you have to design a new phone and you want to, for example, you have to decide which type of aluminum, which type of plastic, which type of metal. You want to get inspired by many different material and fabrics. You have the studio, with all materials all around, because you want to get that vibe, that sparks that comes from looking at things, making connection, one image with another, or maybe touching something, sniffing something, whatever it is, depends from the goal and the objective that you have. In the same way, in the digital space, you have to put in place those things so the people they can connect and reconnect and create new connection in a different way. So that's why when you just join a team and say, okay, that's the design team, and then you have a very corporate environment, you already know that creativity doesn't really happen in that place. Just because that's the human being. It's not that they're stupid guys and you have the brilliant guys in the other place. No, that's not absolutely like that. But they don't have the environment that you need in order to be creative. So another example, in Apple, the industrial design team has, well, it's quite complex as a studio, but in the middle they have some tables. They are the very same table that you can find in the Apple Store, and that's why you have those tables in the Apple Store, because they say, oh, that's rather a good way to just display and show the product in a store. And the reason, because they have the table right in the middle of everyone in the room, is because that table is the aggregator. Everyone can be around it, touch the model, pick up the model, think about it, and share ideas. That set of tables, they play a big role in the design conversation, because at the end of the day, design is just a conversation. To be fair, is a thought that eventually became a conversation. So designing, it's a show conversation. So in the Apple example, is the table. It's not just the table, but this is just a small example. We use the wall in the Reiner lab. It's not just a nice to have. It's not like, oh, well, it's if we have space, if we have time, if we have money, we can do it. No, if you don't do it, it just doesn't happen. If we talk about bringing design thinking into the company, unfortunately, you can't really skip not even one of all the things that we just discussed today, because otherwise they both start to sink on one side, because maybe you have a good studio, but you don't support communication, so it doesn't really work. Maybe you have the chief designer, but you don't have the initiative at the bottom, so the guy at the top struggle. Or you have a lot of good initiative at the bottom, but you never reach the C level. So because you don't have your guy there, so the company is never aware of all the good things that are happening. Or maybe, I don't know, you don't create that connection, that communication, so there is no really, you can really spread the different type of culture. So yeah, that's why we have one Apple, one Google, and few others.
But all the things need to come together at the end of the day. It all needs to fall into place. And I guess another thing that kind of, even if all of these things are in place, in order to be successful in the long term, it needs to be sustained and adopted by kind of everybody in the organization. So one thing that might be a blocker is lack of sort of process practice, because you mentioned earlier, it's not just something that you do once. It's like a muscle that you train, or a musical instrument that you practice. The more you do it,
Correct.
the more fluent you become at design thinking and becoming design driven as an organization. And this kind of culture change doesn't happen overnight. So it's something that you need buy-in from a few key stakeholders, as well as this grassroots movement of sort of bottom-up thinking, and creating that environment for success, and approaching things without, getting rid of that fear of failure, and really just being able to exit your kind of analytical brain and then explore the problem space, explore the solution space, and test with actual real users. And at the end of the day, hopefully come up with the best solution for a problem that you're trying to solve, and always iterating upon that. And because, the world that we live in is dynamic, it's always changing. So the best solution at one point is not going to be the best solution in the future. So,
absolutely.
it's that continual cycle. And I think all of those points that we've talked about are super, super interesting takeaways. But if there was one thing that you could summarize out of all of that, that is the most important thing to go away to your company tomorrow for all the listeners, what would that one thing be?
Oh, that's really 1 billion. dollar
Right.
question. Yeah,
We'd all
yeah,
be
because
Apple or Google if we had that answer right now.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, and because we just say that that we need everything in place, right? So there is not really an answer to that question, but probably we can rephrase it yeah, like what it may be the first step. Well, eventually it will be also one of the most important, but will not be enough. But I'd say, well, definitely the ratio. For example, we know that a good designer non-design ratio is no, not a perfect, but a very good one is 1 to 5, and that's a very very good one. But if you can just go down to 1 to, no, 20 is a little bit, but 1 to 20, 1 to 10 is already a good start. Just for the fact that you have more people thinking that way, so it's is already the good starts. Because if you have one designer every 200 employees,
That's a big
yeah,
job to
that's
evangelize, right?
yeah. You see, yeah. So probably the first thing is to just plan to hire more designer with the goal to just go down to 1 to 20, 1 to 10, and in a perfect world 1 to 5. That's the first step, because if we don't have designer, there is no design thinking, right? So probably we can just say that that's maybe the first step.
But I
Once you
guess at
have
the
that,
same time, you could probably argue that even if it isn't, this ideal ratio of 1 to 5, depending on your business, of course, because
yeah,
some are more or less design or kind of product or so on focused and might focus more on technology, but at least hiring people with the right mindset and the understanding of
yeah,
the process. Because, like we said before, design thinking and being design driven isn't necessarily about designing. It's about a way of framing problems and a way of understanding the world, and going out to get evidence, and disproving or proving what is right or wrong.
yeah, yeah, exactly. So, well, I didn't specify, but when I say designer, that I don't mean UX UI designer. I mean, as you say, design thinker. So it's
Right.
from that point of view, it may be some guy with a good design background that works in the financial or does whatever he does. But yeah, so design thinkers. So probably we should say 1 to 5, 1 to 20, 1 to 10, with the goal of 1 to 5 design thinker in the company. And it's a good critic mass to just, at least you get something for free, because there is some momentum.
Yeah.
So even if you don't put everything in place, you get some traction in that direction.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think that we've really dived quite deep into a lot of really interesting issues, each of which we could probably talk for another hour or two
Yeah,
about. But since
a
we're kind
week.
of running, exactly, I mean, we could write a book about it, each of them. But just
Yeah.
for the sake of time and wrapping up the episode here, I'd kind of like to ask you, what does user experience mean to you?
Yeah. So I have one very holistic and one very cognitive. So what I used to say is that for me, there is no UX because everything is UX. That's what I like to say, to just state that UX is so much more than the people think. It is not the visual part, UX, and that leads to the second definition. Basically, to me, UX is everything that happened between a human being and a product slash service slash whatever it is, whatever object, tangible or untangible, that human being is connected to. So it's the cognitive process that happen and always happen in the user mind, because it's the brain that actually produced that experience. So as I said, there is no UX because everything UX, and to me UX is that phenomenon, that manifestation,
That end-to-end
that
experience of
yeah, that
everything.
activity, yeah, that happen in the user mind when it interacts with something. Let's just define it as a something. It's very broad, very holistic, very wide, but I truly believe in that definition.
Yeah, absolutely. And that links quite closely to the definition that Donald Norman and Jakob Nielsen give as well. It's something that encompasses all aspects of the end user's interaction with a company, its services, and its products. So it's that holistic experience. It's interesting then you get into the kind of discussion about, when does one experience end and the other begin? It's such a sort of miasma of experience. It really is everything around us and everything that we do during every single kind of waking hour that we have. So I think you're pretty spot on there.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you very much.
All right, well, it's been a real pleasure talking to you, and I'm definitely going to go to work tomorrow with a lot of new ideas and a lot of things that I want to implement. So thanks again for being a great guest.
Thank you, Nicholas. I really, really enjoy talking with you.
I've been your host, Nicholas Tenhue, and if you enjoyed the show, please subscribe and leave us a review on iTunes. Remember to tune in next week for another episode of the UX Blog.